This incident occurred when I was a little child. I used to often take my younger brother to the arcade back then. I was maybe 11 at the time. My brother was around 9 years old. He could walk to this arcade with dozens of entertaining games from his home in approximately 20 minutes. All the oldies were there: Pac-Man, Frogger, and Mortal Kombat. My favorite game, there was one of their racing games. My brother used to play the fighting game all the time. We went one day after school for a bit, as we often did. There were a lot of people there. And I recall that despite all the game's vibrant colors, the inside of the building was usually very gloomy. I was engaged in gameplay. Then I recall turning to look at my brother and saw a stranger walking toward him. He seemed to be interested in speaking with my brother. In the meantime, I approached him since I wanted additional cash for the games and I was having him keep the cash. As I got closer to my brother, I saw that they had turned around and retreated. He then turned around and started walking again. I returned to my games after receiving some cash from my brother. Between my games, I did observe the guy since he did not appear to be there alone. He was not really engaging in the games either. He was only sort of scanning the area. I made a point of keeping a closer check on my brother after that since I was a bit intrigued about why he had approached my brother earlier. We spent another hour or so in the arcade. Then we made the decision that it was time to return home. We exited the arcade after I picked up my brother, and we began to make our way back to our home down the sidewalk. But I saw that the guy had also departed as we exited the arcade. He was around 50 feet behind us. The arcade was around 10 blocks distant from our home. We walked down the first street for 4 minutes after crossing it before entering our area. The dude was around 50 feet away from us the whole time. I advised my brother to move more quickly. He did not understand why he was stupid. I told him about the guy who worked at the arcade. He seemed to be following us too. We accelerated a little bit after seeing that my brother seemed a little worried. The guy seemed to quicken his speed as we did. About once per minute, we would turn to check behind us. The guy continually seemed to be avoiding attention by glancing in another direction. The guy was trailing us wherever we went, and it was beginning to truly freak me out. We continued moving quickly till we could see our home in the distance. My brother and I then began to run till we arrived at our front door. We entered when I opened the door. Now that we were inside the home, I felt a lot safer. My folks should be home from work, I had hoped. However, I noticed that their vehicles were still outside of the driveway. So they were not yet at home. Quickly I peered out the window with my brother to check if we could see the guy. We failed to see him. As a result, we felt as if we could stop worrying about him. The TV was switched on. We got going on it. 10 minutes later, I heard somebody approaching the front door. A doorknob turning may then be heard. I thought it was my father or mother. I then moved to open the door for them. I saw there were still no vehicles in the driveway as I passed the front window. I turned back right away since I had a nasty feeling. I quickly returned to the living room and alerted my brother that we had both just heard a knock on the window and turned to check. He was standing there at the window pointing to us when the call from the arcade came through. He had a smirk on his face that was quite unsettling. Running was all we could do. We quickly closed the door to my bedroom. Why I did not thought to contact the cops is beyond me. But somehow I simply never gave it any consideration. I waited with my brother beneath my bed for what seemed like an eternity. The man would begin to bang on several windows. It truly frightened us. He may break into the home. I was worried. The sound of an automobile finally emerged from outside. The front door then opened soon after that. My father had arrived home from work. My brother and I sprang out from under the bed as quickly as I heard my father's voice, and immediately told him everything. In the end, he called the cops. We had to explain what had transpired to the police. We never encountered the guy again, but I am not sure whether he was ever located. I visited our state fair with my family when I was a bit younger, around 6 years back. There were many thrills at the festival, but the arcade rides were undoubtedly my favorite at the time. I recall that they had a sizable arcade with all the typical games at the fairground's rear area of the building. I recall visiting the arcade earlier in the day one day while we were at the expo. Then, just before leaving, we returned late at night. It was en route home. A fascinating sight was also seen by my parents across the street from the arcade. I then entered. It had gotten very late by this point, and no one else was really there in the arcade. I attended my favorite game, which included shooting basketballs to see how many points you could score in a minute. I engaged in a couple games of it. I made the decision to check on my parents' readiness to go after that. However, the moment I looked around, the machine behind me began to make a lot of noise. It was a screen-based game that resembled Pac-Man in several ways. However, I was unaware of this one. All of the machine's sound effects were activated, and its lights were flashing. I entered the room, but it did not appear to be on. I then turned to stare at the empty screen, and then it suddenly switched on. It first appeared as the game screen, but thereafter, the text changed and began flashing arbitrary phrases. What was happening was a mystery to me. I just left the arcade and hurried as quickly as I could to my parents. I am still unsure as to whether it was a genuine malfunction, a joke, or anything else. However, I am aware of how much that frightened me on that particular day. I still feel frightened just thinking about it. I was 10 years old when this incident happened. Even though it happened 12 years back, I can still clearly recall it. I attended my buddy Peter's birthday celebration. There were approximately 10 children present. They did not all hang out with me and Peter. However, his celebration was held in a nearby arcade. I was thus quite eager to go. One of those amusement centers where you purchase tokens to play games. Additionally, it provides tickets if you succeed in the games. You may purchase prizes from the arcade with your tickets. We each received 25 tokens, and I can very clearly recall my determination to get the most tickets of any child. The arcade was rather spacious. We then dispersed to look for some games to play. I first played a game where you had to strike coffers as they emerged from the earth. At that, I received a lot of tickets. After that, I engaged in several additional activities, such as spinning games at random. I was doing well, and I thought I had a respectable number of tickets. I eventually made the decision to count my tickets in order to determine their precise number. I then started off to the side. A guy came over while I was counting. He was not someone I recognized as being an employee or a member of Peter's group. He grinned and said hello to me. Then he stated that I had a large number of tickets. "Yes, I am counting them right now," I said to him. The guy then revealed to me that while he often visits the arcade because he enjoys playing the games, he is now too old to win any rewards. After that, he offered to give me some of the tickets he had in his possession. I was rather pleased to learn this. I thus informed him that I would want to purchase them. He suggested to follow him, and that he had them in his vehicle. I had previously heard of elderly folks handing children their tickets. I was not even suspicious since a youngster had only a few months earlier given me their tickets. I was happy to follow the guy out the front door and into the parking area. We moved over to the side where he had parked his vehicle. The guy unlocked his beat-up old automobile and opened the rear door. He advised me to assist myself. So I entered. There was a sizable stack of tickets, as it turned out. Over 1,000 of them had to be there, and rubber bands were used to keep them all together. I heard the door close behind me as I reached for them. I was first perplexed, but then I suddenly felt dreadful. I saw the guy stepping into the driver's seat as the front door opened. The engine was then started. He was not simply offering me free tickets, I realized now. I began to get really frightened, and the guy began to flee. Despite my efforts, the door was locked. I attempted to open the window as we began to leave the parking lot. The window began to open and close. As it happened, I saw a father and his kid exiting their vehicle to go to the arcade. I looked them in the eyes. I waved at them and said, "Help," as loud as possible. The man driving noticed that I had slid down the window as soon as it did. He locked it so I could not roll it back up with his control. However, the father's anxiety seemed to be stirred by my cries for assistance, since he began to rush and yell at us. This, I believe, helped the guy understand that he could not get away with it. He quickly left the parking area and raced into the street. I felt like I had failed in my attempt to flee, which made me quite anxious. Then, out of nowhere, the guy urged me to get out as he pulled over to the side of the road. He opened the door's lock. Immediately after he did, I unlocked it and returned. The guy sped off as I ran the whole distance back to the arcade parking area. As soon as I entered the parking lot, I immediately saw the dad. He seemed worried, so I told him what had occurred. I was brought back to the party, but not before the police were summoned. The birthday celebration was essentially over, but everyone was relieved that I was okay. The suspect was ultimately apprehended a few days later. I am an arcade employee. About 2 months ago, I was working a typical Friday shift from 6:00 p.m. to midnight, which was when we closed. The majority of the shift would typically be extremely busy until 12 p.m., at which point it would get rather quiet. It was the same as usual today. I spent some time working the concessions and kept myself quite occupied. I then switched to cleaning, strolling around sweeping and sterilizing inactive equipment. In addition to a huge gaming area, the arcade also contained a small bowling alley and a laser tag section in the rear. We were presently making some minor adjustments to our laser tag system, so it was not in use. Due to the popularity of the game among the clients, it was only going to be available for roughly a week. In less congested places, I moved about cleaning and sweeping. I saw a dude at the laser tag area about 9 o'clock. He was only scanning the area. He proceeded to enter the entryway that was meant to be locked after doing so. I walked over to inform the guy that he was not allowed to be back there. It was rather dark as I entered the space. I told him to go since the laser tag was over while I was still standing at the doorway. However, nobody replied. I moved farther inside and had a look around. He could not be found anyplace. Although I switched on every light I could, the space was still very dark. I looked around, but I could not see the moon. I stayed in there for around 5 to 10 minutes before concluding that he must have departed, and exiting the room once again. When I returned to work, the time really passed quickly. When 11 o'clock finally arrived, there was not much noise. There was barely 1 hour left. I continued to clean after that, and then I began to put things away. Several of my coworkers left for home. At precisely midnight, we could begin to wind down. At that point, Hazel, the manager, and I were the only two left. I circled the arcade once more to sweep the flooring. However, I stopped when I reached the corner where the laser tag was. The previous guy might be seen peering out of the room. He had a furious expression on his face, uncertain about what to do. I was certain he had seen me. I made the decision to just inform him in a stern tone that we were done and that he needed to go right now. He hid, though, and entered the laser tag area once again. When I informed Hazel, she said she would accompany me to speak with the guy. So I went back to tell her. We returned to the laser tag arena and entered once again. I cried out to the moon, "Hazel." He was nowhere to be found once again. We searched all around, this time after the laser tag area, for roughly 30 men. We looked all over the place, but he was nowhere to be seen. We once again reasoned that he must have gone and chose to return home. We never saw that guy again, and I have no idea who he was.